Excellent. Welcome to the Special Needs Financial Planning for Two Generations workshop, sponsored by the Autism Alliance. Before I introduce tonight's speaker, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Allison Daigle, and I am one of the co-directors, joined by my colleague Pam McKillop, co-director, and Kathy Parquette, autism specialist. We would like to thank you all for joining us. Tonight's speaker is Alex Nadworney of Special Needs Financial Planning, a specialty practice of Affinia Financial Group. This workshop is scheduled from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. In tonight's workshop, we will highlight the various planning pressure points where parents should be aware of changes related to their child's benefits, legal, and financial issues. The primary focus is to help parents avoid common mistakes and pitfalls in their own planning. In addition, Alex will also discuss the new ABLE account and its potential role in planning for your child. And now I will turn it over to Alex.
Great. Thank you so much, Allison. Thank you, Pam. Really appreciate being here tonight. And we all didn't, have to hop in our cars, and there's really not much traffic, but I think it's picking up a little bit. So it's nice to be able to be here again. So I'm going to share my screen really quick. And like Allison mentioned, this topic is planning for two generations. So when we think about planning for our family, usually, not only planning for yourself, but also planning for your child. So thinking about, and I just want to make sure I have the full screen, I think is shared now, right? Okay, perfect. So this is our team here. So you can see it's a picture of myself. This is Cindy Haddad. This is John. It's actually my father. Some of you may know. So I joined his practice about 8 years ago now, after working at a couple of different financial planning firms, doing more retirement analysis, insurance planning, and then joined him to be able to help plan for families similar to ours. So we are all family members to individuals with special needs. So I have can't believe it, 30-year-old brother with Down syndrome, just turned 30 this January. His 21st birthday, we had a party bus. This year we had to celebrate a little bit different with a Zoom party, but it was still a dance party, which was fun, but just, people at their homes doing it this time around. So I am going to talk about a couple different things today. The first being the special needs planning timeline, just because, as we all know, there is only limited time in the day. So this really helps to organize what you should be thinking about when, depending on how old your child is and when you plan on retiring or other different planning circumstances that you have. We talk about the 5 factors of special needs planning. So John and Cindy wrote a book back in 2007. You can see a picture of it here, called the Special Needs Planning Guide. So the book is actually broken out in chapters based on the timeline and the 5 factors I'm going to talk about. So if you're really looking to get in the weeds of this, suggest ordering this book. It is available on Amazon, and they are in the process right now of actually updating it to include the ABLE account and some of the things, but that won't be out quite yet. They're in the process of editing it at this point. Be talking briefly about the framework for financial planning. So that again talks a lot about where you should be spending your time, because we all have different situations. So you want to make sure that the time that you're spent is most productive for what you're looking to plan for. Understanding the basics. So that is, talking a little bit about some estate planning and some other items, again, some common pitfalls. I'm going to touch on housing. If anybody has any specific questions related to that, I'm happy to talk to you either later, or if you can ask a question, I'm happy to spend more time there too. Obviously, there's a good number of us on this call, but there's enough of us that please feel free to interrupt and ask questions. Obviously, this is precious time to you, and want to make sure that you came here, and the purpose of this is, your answers are being met. So again, like Allison mentioned too, briefly touching on the ABLE accounts as well. So when you think about planning, it is all about striking a balance, and every single family is going to have a different balance because your child's abilities are all different. So the government benefits that you may be able to access will be unique to your child, and also your personal resources are unique to you as well. So depending on how well of a saver you are, how large of an income you have, maybe you have some inheritances coming to you, making sure that you're not only, maximizing those and being mindful, and you're aware of your personal resources and maybe employee benefits as well. And again, looking at that balance that you have. So tonight we're going to be talking about both of those and how you can pull them both together to provide a great life for your son or daughter. So this is the special needs planning timeline. So I think this is very helpful because again, it does outline where a person should be spending their time. These are what we call the planning pressure points. So starting off from early intervention, your child may not have had early intervention depending on when your child was diagnosed. So usually that starts as early as they do receive a diagnosis. It is from the state, from up until when they go into the school system. So from usually birth to age 3. And that, Ed, I know a lot of you probably have already gone through all of this, but just kind of thinking back, going through the journey that you've had with your loved one, I think it's nice to always reflect and think about that as well. So then thinking about at age 3, that's when they enter into the school system. Then they're on the IEP, individual education plan. So that's where you're able to meet with the teachers, different folks, different people that support them and really help them through the different goals that they may have in that IEP plan each year. And then going to the transition planning in the state of Massachusetts, that starts at age 14. Really important to start that as early as possible to think about what is your child going to be doing once they do turn age 22, because the entitlement of an education is one of the biggest entitlements that your child will ever have. So you want to take advantage of any opportunities that your child may have, therapies that your child may be able to access to be able to help them become as independent as possible once they do graduate out of school. So in between there, your child will turn age 18. Not sure how many of you are over the age of 18, so I've kind of gone through. This is a very big pressure point because at that age, technically, your child is no longer, from a legal perspective, a child. So they can qualify for different government benefits, and also you need to consider guardianship and the alternatives to guardianship. They have been talking about changing the guardianship age to a later age, which makes a lot of sense because our brains don't fully develop until we're 26 years old. So thinking about guardianship, I think almost all of us at the age of 18 probably should have been under guardianship of someone else, because these are big decisions that you're asking someone to make. And if the hospital or the nurses or the teachers won't accept, the parents stepping in and assisting, then there usually needs to be some type of legal documentation in place that will allow the parents to speak on behalf and help with, again, different financial and medical decisions. So really big thing to think about, especially if your child is medically complex, does see frequent hospital visits, that you start planning for that 6 months prior. I am going to talk more specifically about the legal focuses as well. So then Ssi Medicaid, so thinking about those different federal benefits, again, because of federal perspective, your assets and income will no longer be counted for your loved one at that point. So then phase forward, age 22 in Massachusetts, the day that your child turns 22, they are no longer able to go to school. I think there has been a little bit of flexibility because of the past year and how crazy it's been. Kind of the transition has taken a little bit longer. So maybe the school or DDS kind of coordinated with each other to either extend or start services earlier or later. So this is kind of a fluke of a year, but it is typically that age 22. So then at that point, between the ages of 18 and 22, hopefully sooner than later, you will receive what's called a 688 referral to be introduced to a lead agency, a state agency that will provide supports to your child if they qualify based on different criteria. So autism only is a somewhat recently new diagnosis. In the past, you had to also have intellectual disabilities, but the wonderful is now DDS, if you only have autism, there are different services that you can access through DDS, which again, I'll talk a little bit more in future slides. But just thinking at age 22, they switch from the school, which is more of a town-based entitlement, to no longer really any entitlements for different services, but instead have access to different lead agencies from the state, maybe some day programs, maybe residential employment, and then they switch from an IEP to what's called an ISP, an individual service plan. So same idea, you meet once a year with the different key players and talk about what the goals are for the upcoming year. And then think about a parent's retirement. So you can see that those gray lines, that's what we call traditional planning. I don't think any family is really traditional. So We need to change that word, but I don't know if anybody has any ideas. So thinking about college, thinking about retirement, and it's kind of funny because there's been a lot of commercials, but it shows, okay, these big pressure points, oh my gosh, how are you going to plan for college? How are you going to plan for retirement in your estate? Well, as you can see, we have a lot more ticks on here to think about than just those three: retirement and estate planning and maybe college as well. So thinking about when a parent retires, a big decision that one will make is, when do you collect Social Security? Because when you start collecting Social Security will also have an impact on what your child will be able to receive. So I'll go more into detail there. But again, just something to think about when you look at your timeline, when to start. If you're married, you have a spouse as well, when do they start collecting? There are different strategies sometimes we implement for Medicare planning as well. And then thinking about what is going to happen when the parents pass away, who's going to be overseeing the assets and on the child's behalf, and making sure that you are protecting that from a government benefits perspective as well. So your chances are you're going to live a long life. It is important that you think about the estate distribution, but it isn't the only thing you need to think about. As you can see here, there's a lot of planning that needs to be done, and you don't just stop once you've drafted your estate plan. You need to kind of continuously revisit this on an annual basis to make sure there's money that goes into that trust, right? And that you have the right people to oversee to be able to use that money to make your child's life as great as possible. I always joke and say, my brother, for example, I could give him, all the money in the world, or I could give him a 12-pack of Coca-Cola, and he would be way more pleased with a 12-pack of Coca-Cola. So it's important that you have a person that will give him that treat. We try really hard not to give him too much to make sure he has a beautiful smile, but that you're able to share those treats and those fun activities with him as time goes on, versus just having money kind of in an account and not using it for the reasons why you saved it. So, sorry guys. So here is the 5 factors of special needs planning. So when Cindy and John sat down and were thinking about planning for our families and the other families that we work with, they broke it down into what we call now the 5 factors of planning. Because obviously, yes, we are certified financial planners, but it isn't all about the money. The money helps to create that great life when you combine all 5 of these factors. The government benefits. For example, there are a lot of different programs and services out there that you really can't access unless you are enrolled in different government benefit programs. So we'll talk more about that, making sure also too, you're thinking about planning for 2 generations, thinking of 2 people's retirement. Even if you have a substantial amount of wealth, it can be very challenging to provide for someone completely out of your own pocket, especially if there are medical expenses. So it's important that you do maximize those and protect those benefits, even if you're not using them immediately at the moment. Legal planning. So that again is thinking about the guardianship, the alternatives to guardianship, as well as legal planning, not only just the special needs trust, but also thinking about yourself too, and the different documents that you need to have in place if something were to happen to you. Family and support, I think this is one of the biggest pieces. This is the people. This is the relationships that you've built over the years. Again, the people that help make your child's life as great as it is. Who are the different folks that you want to identify? And we always say, there's never going to be one person that can replace all that you can do, but there likely will be a team of people that you can pull together that can replace a lot of the different items that you do. No one will ever do it as well as you, but at some point, you do have to start to pass the baton to different people and teach them all the different skills that you've learned over your child's entire lifetime. And then moving on to that heart, obviously what I just said is extremely emotional to think about. But I think once you start checking off the list of these different items, it helps to relieve some of that stress that maybe we wake up with in the middle of the night, like, oh my gosh, I forgot to do this or this or this. But again, kind of thinking about what is the first step that you take to help move closer to those different worries that you may have as time goes on. Is this going in the right direction? Any questions? Real good? Okay. So the legal factors. So when you think about legal, most people think trusts, right? Guardianship. So it is exactly that. How do you plan for when you can no longer make your own decisions? That's both for you, your spouse, as well as your child. and what are the options once your child turns age 18. So that again goes into the different areas. So estate planning and guardianship. So when you think about estate planning, it's extremely important that you choose your disability law attorney wisely. So there are a lot of attorneys out there, and there are a lot of attorneys that focus in different areas. Just even thinking of a doctor, you know, doctors have their own specialties. Some attorneys focus in real estate, some focus in corporate law, and some focus in family law. Others focus in estate planning and elder planning. So typically elder planning and disability planning is the same because they're planning for Medicaid. And so again, it's very similar. So a lot of times a lot of attorneys kind of will advertise that they're elder planning attorneys. They will likely be able to also know disability law. If you're looking for an attorney, I'm happy to share different names as well. There's a lot of wonderful, wonderful attorneys in Massachusetts. Everyone's situation is a little bit different. So it really depends on what your assets look like as well, and what your family dynamics are on also which attorney you choose. So another really important thing is making sure that your documents are current and the people that you name in those documents are current. So often it's suggested that you review your estate plan every 5 years or so. May not need to be as frequent. However, there was a recent passing of a law called the Secure Act, which passed the beginning of 2020, which, thinking back over the course of the last year, I think there were bigger things that happened. So many people have forgotten about the passing of the Secure Act, but it does have a pretty big impact on our families that have children with special needs, especially if the majority of your assets are in retirement accounts, which a lot of us do have because we go to work, you maximize your 401k and just automatically, and maybe your employer gives you a match too, and boom, 30 years later, you have a sizable retirement account, and then maybe you have your home, and these are the assets that you want to leave to your children. Well, going back to the passing of the Secure Act, if that's your situation, you have a lot of retirement accounts, it may be worth revisiting if you've already drafted your estate plan prior to 2020 to make sure that it complies with the Secure Act, because there is an exception with that, in that you're able to continue to stretch the required minimum distributions over a retirement account if you have a disability. So if the retirement account names a special needs trust as the beneficiary, your child will only have to take out a little piece of that retirement account and pay taxes on it over their lifetime. Whereas if you left your retirement account to another child that's more than 10 years younger than you, or any individual that's more than 10 years younger than you, because of the Secure Act, they're forced to take the entire retirement account out within 10 years. That means they can keep it in there for 9 years, but come year 10, they have to completely distribute the IRA or 401k to their name. And IRAs are taxed as ordinary income. So usually the suggestion would be you take a tenth out to keep that income amount lower. And I know I may be getting a little bit in the weeds, but again, I think this is really important to just have a little bit of an idea. So when you go talk to your attorney, you can say, does this comply with the Secure Act? And also in years prior, we typically suggested that retirement accounts be left to non-special needs beneficiaries because of the taxation, but we've changed that in many situations because the special needs trust can stretch it over their lifetime, whereas maybe the other beneficiaries, the other siblings, have to take it out over 10 years. Again, every situation is different, but I think it's really important. If you want to do some Google search in the Secure Act or reach out with any questions, I'm happy to answer them too. But just be mindful of that. If you did do your estate plan prior to 2020 and you have more than one beneficiary, you may want to revisit and make sure that, again, your trust is would enable your special needs child to stretch out those RMDs. So going back to kind of a little bit more of the basic, out of the weeds a bit, thinking about those basic estate planning documents, everyone should have a will. So what a will does is it shares with, it is a couple of things. So one, it names your personal representative. So the person that would help to settle your probate estate. So your estate, your house, your bank accounts, any investment accounts that you have are what's called probate assets. And you would need to have a will or some type of trust account, trust vehicle to put those types of accounts in to potentially avoid probate. And also a will names who you'd like to name as guardian if your child is under guardianship. It does not automatically appoint that person to step in as guardian. They still would have to go through the same process that you went through if your child is under guardianship and go to the courts, but at least it tells the courts, here, this is the person that we would like to take over as guardian. And typically the courts obviously would listen, but they want to make sure that person is still the right person, especially if you wrote your will 20 years ago and maybe that person's no longer in your child's life. Another one is the healthcare proxy. So that's the person that you would identify to help you if you needed someone to make medical decisions on your behalf. So you can name one person to be this. You can also name successors, but only one person can serve at a time. Power of attorney, that's it. Again, if you were to become incapacitated and need someone to pay your bills, then you would want to have a power of attorney. So it's really important that you have these documents so that in case something happens, that somebody wouldn't have to go and get guardianship over you because you have these documents in place that would name the individual. Also, if your child is competent enough to know, I want mom or I want dad to be my healthcare proxy or power of attorney, you can have them sign a healthcare proxy or power of attorney versus having to go the guardianship route. So guardianship is always the last, you always want to look at that last. All the other alternatives, the least restrictive alternatives you want to look at first. And the good thing is in Massachusetts, there is ways that you can limit guardianship. So maybe they just need help with medical decisions. Maybe they don't need help choosing where they're going to live. So you can be very specific on the guardianship on what different items that they have capacity for, maybe don't have capacity for. So usually with guardianship, you start that about 6 months prior to their 18th birthday. Special needs trust. So there are 3 different types of special needs trust. The one that all of you should do in advance is called a third party special needs trust. So the reason why it's called third party is because a third person, not your child with special needs, is creating that trust. The money will never be in your child with special needs name. Instead, it goes from the third party directly into that trust. And that enables it to be a discretionary supplemental needs trust. And that means the money really can be used for anything on your child's behalf. There are some restrictions. If you use money to pay for things that government benefits would pay for, the government benefits that your child is receiving may be reduced, but it doesn't mean that you can't. In some situations, you may not want your child living in somewhere that maybe a government program would pay for if you have the resources to pay out of pocket. So it really depends. The trustee, the person that oversees the trust account, would be the one to make that decision. So you want to make sure you name someone that is familiar with, what your child needs. A lot of times they are really good at communicating, so they would maybe talk to the guardian. So these are very important roles that you want to consider. The trustee is the person that you trust to oversee the funds, to make distributions on your child's behalf. And the beneficiary is usually your child with special needs, so they don't have discretion over the account. Instead, it's the trustee, and that's what protects it for government benefits. That you have someone else that's in control of making those distributions. It's also typically irrevocable once the money is funded. So a common question people ask is, well, when should we fund the special needs trust? We usually don't suggest funding it until the second spouse passes away. Unless you're in a situation where you have more money than you need, then maybe it makes sense to start doing gifts into the special needs trust. But again, since it's irrevocable, that means you can't make changes. So if you were to need that money, it can be very challenging to get it out if you needed, care for yourself, for example. And you want to make sure that you do take care of yourself, because if you don't take care of yourself, it's impossible for you to take care of your child. So always say, put your face mask on first, take care of you as much as you can, because again, you're the one that they depend on. So it's important that you do that self-care. OBRA, first party trust. So that is if your child were to receive assets and maybe planning wasn't done in advance, or maybe there was a family member that didn't understand how complex the special needs planning can be, but they were trying out of the goodness of their heart, they want to leave some money to your child. So good thing is there is a way to put money into a trust and get them back onto benefits if the assets that they inherited disqualified them. So you would go to an attorney, they would draft this type of trust called a first party. Just think about that. It's their money. They're the first persons. Their money would go into that trust. The distribution rules are a bit more restrictive. And also there's what's called a payback provision. So the payback provision is if your child is on Medicaid and receiving any types of benefits from Medicaid, Medicaid would be reimbursed when your child passes away, but they could use that money for their entire lifetime. So obviously the family would use that money first, protect any other money that would go into a third party trust. And then, that would be able to pass on to successor beneficiaries. A pooled trust is another option. So that is if maybe there aren't any family members that you would feel comfortable, or professionals or anyone that you know that you'd want to name as a trustee, you could put funds into a pool trust, and that's overseen by a nonprofit. We usually suggest if the estate isn't very large, it may make sense to go into a pool trust. And there's actually a social worker that typically comes that also works at the nonprofit. So there's a trustee as a nonprofit, the social worker works at the nonprofit, and it's not customized as much as it would be if you obviously had your own first party or third party trust, but it is a wonderful alternative depending on the amount of assets that you have that you're able to leave to your child. So all of these are wonderful ways to make sure that assets are passed to your child and that they are protected and still able to receive government benefits.
Alex, we have a question in the chat. Can you take it?
Of course.
Okay. So one mom is asking, so if we just have special needs children, the Secure Act doesn't affect us? Question mark.
So if the only beneficiaries of your trust are special needs children, then it should comply with the Secure Act rule, unless there are additional beneficiaries within the trust, then it may need to be revisited by an attorney. I would just everyone should just email them. Obviously, I'm not an attorney, just to say, hi, I know we drafted our trust not that long ago. Just want to make sure that it is that, my child would be able to stretch their IRAs because of the Secure Act, or just that it complies with the Secure Act. So.
Thank you, Alex.
Typically, in that situation, I imagine it would, but again, I just think it makes sense to double check, because you never know, maybe they have a cousin or someone in there that could be the successor and it could disqualify for that reason. So I always like to double, triple check.
Thank you.
And so, yeah, when you draft your estate plan, it really is the people, those are the biggest decisions that you'll want to make, because those are the ones that will oversee things. So even if you don't have, a lot of people maybe don't have a person that they feel comfortable naming as the trustee. That's okay. There are a lot of wonderful professionals out there that can serve as trustee. We typically suggest finding one person that maybe doesn't do the day-to-day or even makes any distributions, but would receive the year-end statement. Make sure that money is being distributed on behalf of the beneficiary. And if it's not, that special person that, again, doesn't have much responsibility, but does have the power to potentially remove the trustee. So we have families that don't have any children or loved ones or cousins or whomever it is, friends that are local that could serve as the trustee, but they have someone in Florida that would be comfortable enough to check in once a year with the trustee, with the beneficiary, and again, have the power to potentially remove if it's not working out. So just think of one person that you trust, that knows your child, that you feel comfortable with them having some control, and then you can name professionals to help with some of the gaps that maybe are there too. So every situation is different. Usually we suggest completing what we call a letter of intent and putting down all those awesome people in your life and your child's life, and then kind of think about what their skills are. I have almost a full presentation on called, creating the team to carry on, which I feel strongly about being a sibling, and what are those different roles? How do you empower them to take over any responsibilities that you may have? And who's out there pretty much, because a lot of people aren't even aware that there are professionals that can serve as guardian, that can serve as trustee, and there are some really good ones too. So government benefit factors. So these are the different programs that are out there, both entitlement and non-entitlement programs, both state and federal, which I talked briefly about. We went over the timeline, but we'll talk more about now. So the entitlement programs, those are the ones that are funded by the federal government. So if your child meets this criteria, they're eligible. And the non-entitlements are, yes, your child meets this criteria, but sorry, our budget for the state, we don't have enough money to be able to provide the types of supports that they would truly need to thrive. So that's why we all need to be great advocates and always, talk to the ARC, understand the way that the budget works, and advocate for more and more for our loved ones. It's really important if your children are transitioning, like around the age of 22, that's when you really want to develop a plan to try to get as much dollars from the state tied to your child, because that will typically continue for future years. It doesn't mean that they can't get other funding in the future, but usually the turning 22 budget is the largest and really something that you want to focus on if you're approaching that age. Government benefit programs. So you've likely heard the $2,000 number. Your child cannot have more than $2,000 in their name and be able to receive SSI. So supplemental security income, it's pretty much a welfare benefit. If your child has a disability and does not have more than $2,000 in their name, they are eligible for SSI. Almost every single time that someone applies for SSI, they are denied. You want to make sure that you then appeal it. I actually have a client who worked for SSI in the appeals department. She was the one that wrote the appeals, has 2 children with special needs. The child has multiple disabilities definitely qualifies for SSI. Even she got a denial. So you want to make sure, and obviously she filled everything out right, gave them everything that she needs. I think that is the first time that your application crosses their desk, they just deny. So don't be discouraged. Unfortunately, just apply again. And then in Massachusetts, when you apply for SSI, your child will likely be enrolled in Medicaid, assuming that they, fall in, that they meet the criteria, but the income criteria and the asset criteria is higher for Medicaid, which is why usually they just are automatically enrolled as well. And Medicaid, you may or may not be aware, but it pays for a lot of different benefits and programs that are out there. And it doesn't have to be your child's primary insurance. Many families keep their child on the family plan and have Mass Health as the secondary. Mass Health will then pay for co-pays. It also can pay for what's called premium reimbursement or premium assistance. So if you are paying a larger premium because you have a family plan, because you're keeping your child on that plan, Mass Health will reimburse you for either a piece or almost all of the amount that you're paying in premium. And the reason for that is because if they were not on your family plan, Mass Health would have to pay a lot more out of pocket to obviously cover your child. So the Federation for Children with Special Needs helps a lot with that. I'm not sure, maybe you guys do as well, helping families kind of apply for that, but I know that they're a great resource too. AFC, so that is a program that if your child is receiving Medicaid, they may be eligible for it if they need assistance with activities of daily living. So you can see the little check mark up here. It says watch Guardianship in AFC, because if you are your child's guardian, you cannot be their AFC caregiver. So I'll go back and talk a little bit. So AFC, it is a monthly tax-free stipend that a caregiver could receive if they're living with your child and assisting with their activities of daily living. They do need assistance, usually more than hand-over-hand supports. They have become a lot more strict with qualifying for AFC. There are 2 different levels depending on the number of activities of daily. They need assisted activities of daily living. Sorry guys, AFC ADL. Sorry, that they need help with. So if your child does need assistance, definitely look into that. Another one is PCA. So they would only qualify for AFC or PCA. PCA usually is more for folks that maybe need are a little bit more medically complex, maybe need some nursing hours, and they qualify a certain number of hours that they would get, and that would be another person. It could be a sibling, as long as they're over, I think, the age of 16, the sibling has to be that age, and then they could pay for that person to help with care. Usually people bring in other folks to help, and that they can use those dollars to pay for that assistance.
And Alex, if I could just interject very briefly, because it's very topical at this point. Next month on June 16th, we will be having an adult family care overview. So for those that would be interested in learning more about the AFC program, please join us on June 16th for that, where we can get into more details about that program. So
that's awesome. And you guys do my little brothers, so thank you.
Awesome, very good, thanks.
So yeah, so my brother, he needs assistance with his ADLs. So my dad is his AFC care provider, and my mom is his guardian. So that's how they got around. Unfortunately, I was hoping that with everything that's going on the past year, especially for single parents, that they would change that rule. They talked about it, they've been talking about it for years, and unfortunately there has not been any changes. But I think for PCAs, I'm pretty sure maybe the guardian was able to get compensated for some of the care. There was some changes there, but Section 8 is another one. So that is a rental subsidy. So when your child turns age 18, you want to get onto the list. Maybe they're not ready to move out yet, but the list is over 10 years long in many situations. So you apply on the centralized list, and their name may come up. If they're ready to move out, then this would pay for a high percentage of their rent. And if your child does need assistance with their activities of daily living, they may even qualify for a 2-bedroom apartment. So maybe they could have, for example, a lot of people, when they think of housing, depending on the level of care that your child needs, they could have, again, 2 bedrooms. Maybe they qualify for AFC. That person could receive AFC and a rental subsidy as well. So especially in Massachusetts, having a lot of your rent paid for is a pretty nice benefit. So different creative ways to think about how to pay for ongoing support would be, again, to get that Section 8 voucher. And there are a lot of different Section 8 houses. A lot of people say, well, I don't want my kid maybe living in a Section 8 home, not realizing that there are beautiful, beautiful homes, beautiful apartments that are Section 8 housing. So each big new development, there has to be a certain number of affordable units in them. So whether it's using a Section 8 voucher or going down to your local housing authority, you may want to tell them, my child is ready to move out of the house. This is what their income is. It's obviously, it may be low, and then they may be able to qualify for either a project-based voucher. There are a variety of different types of affordable housing. So if your child is ready to move out, go to the local housing authority with them and talk to the people that are there to see if there's any opportunity to help them, with the different programs that are out there. So Ssdi, that is a Social Security disability income. So there are 2 different types of Social Security. One is SSI, again, that's more of a welfare benefit, and over here is Social Security disability income, which is what an individual can receive either on their working history. So if they've worked and contributed enough quarters to qualify for disability on their Social Security record, they could continue working, still earning maybe a sizable amount, and collect Ssdi. Or when a parent retires, if your child is on SSI, they would then qualify as a disabled adult child under your record, and they could receive 50% of your benefit. There is something called a family maximum. So if there are multiple people, if you do have a couple of children with special needs, they each may not be able to receive 50%, something to be aware of. But still, they likely would be entitled to something. And then also another huge part of collecting Ssdi is Medicare, because 2 years after your child start to collect Ssdi, they're then eligible for Medicare. So that may be a reason for one parent to start collecting Social Security earlier than the other. We typically don't suggest starting prior to your full retirement age, because if you do that, then even your spousal benefit would be reduced. So really important to understand the rules, because Social Security is a longevity insurance. You usually want to wait as long as possible to start collecting. But again, every situation is different. So that goes into Medicare. And then veterans benefits, there are very specific veterans benefits. If you're a veteran, thank you. And you also can receive a, if you're receiving a pension, your child with special needs may also be able to receive a pension for the rest of their life too. And also the veterans benefits often can be paid into a trust, so it would not offset anything for government benefits. So there was a rule passing a couple of years ago. So we actually were in an article not too long ago speaking specifically about special needs planning and veterans benefits, because there are very unique circumstances, even more so than the traditional special needs plan, right? So I mentioned this earlier, the 688 transition plan. So you want to know what's called the individual's prioritization. And what that is there's two different priorities: priority level 1, priority level 2. Priority 1 means your child is eligible for residential. It's not that common. Many years ago, people used to have their child go into like a residential school, and then almost it was an automatic, then they'd be prioritized for level 1 for DDS. It has changed a bit. They really will look to see if the individual needs residential, just because there's more and more and more individuals that have disabilities that need supports, and they really try to make sure the people that need it the most are able to have it. So typically, if your child has significant behaviors, or if there's not a safe home for them to live in, then they would be prioritized level 1. Level 2, usually DDS will pay for some type of daytime activity. And there have been some changes with the way that DDS delivers services. So the typical way is that there's a contract. So DDS has a budget. They then work with different agencies, and the agency then delivers the service to your child. So in the past, there was a contract. You would then work with, whatever agency it was. They would have a day program there. There's another one in the middle now. It's called agency with choice. So if you're not really happy with what the agency is doing, you do have the option to make some changes. And then the third is, I'm blanking right now. Individualized, it's like, I don't know why I can't think of the name of it.
Self-direction.
Self-directed, yes, thank you so much. Self-directed. So that is when an individual pretty much has an allotment. You want to develop, again, once they turn age 22, you want to figure out what does your child want to do during the day, who can kind of help them with those different activities, what different camps do they like to do, activities do they like to do, and then you can kind of propose that to DDS and say, here's the funding that we would need to be able to create this great life, and hopefully they'll give that to you, and then you're really the one that's overseeing it and hiring and firing people. So it may take a little bit more work on your behalf, but it may be a little bit more unique and custom to your child, especially if you're living maybe in the Berkshires. There's maybe not, as many different agencies to choose from. So my family kind of does a combination. We do agency with choice and just the general one as well. My brother goes to a day program 3 days a week, not really now, he hasn't been back yet, but goes to a day program 3 days, and then he has supported employment 2 days a week. So there's an agency that helps us to find people, because that can be some of the hardest part, to find those different coaches to take James out. And then those 3 days a week is again in that day program. So the day program, it is DDS funded, but sometimes it is funded by Medicaid. So really kind of, talking about the differences is you want to get as many DDS dollars as you can, because that provides the most flexibility. So if your child is not eligible for DDS, they may be eligible for DMH. There's other agencies as well. DDS is the largest one. DMH is Department of Mental Health. MCB is Mass Commission for the Blind. MRC is Mass Rehab Commission. They're trying to work more collectively. It's kind of funny, you walk into a lot of these DDS offices and there is DMH, but they are the same space, but they have their own individual reception desks. So it's really funny because they're working together, but they're still separate, but one step at a time, right? So again, you really just want to figure out what is your child really like to do and help create that. So a good way to do that is to create a person-centered plan and then map out, what a great life would look like for them. Financial factors, so obviously, again, this is really what we talk about. Obviously, the other stuff is just as important. Is thinking about, you know, will there be enough money, and where will that money come from? So this is a helpful chart that outlines, again, where your money should be spent, or sorry, where your time should be spent. So depending on also what your children's abilities are, because it may be extremely challenging for a family if their child is extremely medically complex, almost impossible for a family to be able to provide all the supports that are needed. So obviously you want to make sure you have access to Medicaid, they're receiving SSI. So I'll give you an example here. If a family, the primary resources is the government, they likely want to make sure they're really close friends with the DDS case coordinator. So if there is some types of openings or any other opportunities, that they are understanding of that. And this is a family that maybe isn't able to put much money aside for their own retirement, but that, you know, and that doesn't mean they're not going to have a great life. It's just where this funding will come from. A modest wealth, so the government will provide probably for maybe the day program, maybe they're in some type of shared living home, and then the family would supplement. Maybe they hire someone to check in on the child once or twice, or take them out a couple times a year, and the family can supplement there. A family with significant wealth, maybe they purchased a house the child is living in, but the child is receiving SSI on Medicare, it's on Medicare as well. Or if they have high net worth, maybe they just are able to provide for everything. But again, maybe the child isn't even eligible for different benefits, so there is no other option besides providing for the family. So again, this is really just where you should be spending your time, making sure that you're focusing on those estate planning documents, if there is a lot of wealth tax planning, and then obviously making sure that you're keeping really close with the DDS coordinator. So when you think about special needs financial planning, it's a process. There is no easy solution to this. Unfortunately, it is something that you do need to revisit and make adjustments to, just like your retirement plan. You don't just set it in place and never think about it again. It's something that you want to update on a regular basis, especially if your circumstance, if you change jobs, things change pretty quickly, as we again saw over the past year. So the first step would be to gather information. I know all you guys are so busy. I doubt that anybody has sat down anytime recently, or maybe you have, surprised me, and you wrote down, you know, what assets you have, your liabilities, income sources, and just kind of be aware of it to see, okay, is there ways that I can maximize and maybe save a little bit more, or maybe you have a large amount sitting in cash and you can put a little bit of that at work, or start putting that into some retirement accounts. And then you want to identify your goals. So typically we start with the base plan, which we would call your plan. Again, remember, put your face mask on first, make sure that you're taking care of yourself, because if you're not able to provide for your own retirement, it'll be very challenging to be able to provide for your child in the future. So we want to make sure that we're doing everything that we possibly can for you. And then obviously keeping in mind that you are planning for those two generations. So maybe tweaking and doing some things that maybe would be a little bit different if you weren't doing that. But again, kind of analyzing that as well. And then you lay in the child's goals as well. You know, are they going to be moving out of the home at some point? Would there be a need for supplementing them? What government benefits are they receiving? Are they going to be receiving any different government benefits in the future? And then again, it's the people. You want to make sure that you are bringing in those folks, because they're the ones that may be stepping in at some point, and you can do a slow pass. It doesn't have to be, you know, really do want to help educate them on what your child likes and doesn't like. Like, for example, I thought I was the best sibling in the world. And then I sat down with my mom about 10 years ago. We filled out a letter of intent. I was like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. And then I started working with my dad, and now I do, thank goodness. So, but it isn't necessary for the siblings to know all of this stuff, right? It's really important that they know who to call, that they are in control, that they can say, this doesn't feel right, and make changes. So it is really, again, about developing that team. So here's just some really quick common mistakes. Thinking about an ABLE account, I'm going to talk about that in a moment. It's a maybe. Going back and looking at all this stuff, there is a lot of complicated planning decisions that you need to make. Adding another type of account may be a good reason for many different situations, and it may not. It may just overcomplicate things. There is also a payback provision on those ABLE accounts. So if you're still working towards your personal retirement goal, guess what? You can use money in your name for your child. You can use your money for anything that you want. There's no restrictions on that. So the second you take your money, you put it into an ABLE account, there are restrictions. There's a payback if your child passes away. It goes back to the state, to Medicaid. So, and you can only use that for qualified disability expenses. There are some benefits to the ABLE account. The money grows tax-free, but there is a limit. You can only put $15,000 a year into it. So obviously it's not going to be that much tax-free growth on $15,000. Most of the time people use it on an ongoing basis. So they take the money and they pay for expenses as things come along. A good way to use an ABLE account, I'm just going to fast forward because I know we're coming up on time, is to, here's my brother too. I'm going to show you a picture. These are both my brothers. This is him. Sorry, I just had to. Since I'm talking about this is Cindy's brothers too. So there is limits, you know, $15,000 a year that you can put into. The disability has to be established prior to the age 26. So if they did not have a diagnosis prior to that, they cannot open an ABLE account. If they're on SSI, usually that's the easiest way you know they're eligible for sure. Only you can have one ABLE account per person. So these are similar to the 529 plans. And what 529s, you can have as many as you want. Aunt Sally can open one for Johnny. You know, the grandparents can open one. You can open one. ABLE account, one. They can have one. And anyone can fund it. So they can fund it with their own money. And it must be spent on qualified disability expenses. So the ABLE account, again, there are a lot of restrictions where you can only put $15,000 in per year. However, if they're working, you can put more in. So there is, if they don't have access to a 401k plan and they're working, they can put a little bit more into the ABLE account per year, which is great. But again, it really is usually around like $15,000 they can put in. And if the account goes over $100,000, they will not be eligible for SSI. They will still be eligible for Medicaid, but they will not be eligible for SSI. Many people haven't reached that 100,000 because they've only been in existence since 2017. So not really worried yet about that. And again, there is that payback provision. So when do you use an ABLE account? Most common ways that we see people using ABLE accounts is to help avoiding the spend down process. So everyone has wonderful intentions. They gave gifts to your children, or over the years, your child is now turning age 18. Oh my goodness, they have more than $2,000 in their name. What do we do? Well, one option in the past was to create a first party trust, which costs thousands of dollars to go meet with an attorney, draft a special type of trust, and there goes all the money, which obviously is not ideal. So what a lot of people chose to do was just spend it down as quickly as possible, buying things that maybe they didn't need. So it's coming from a financial advisor, we do not want you to spend down that money if you don't need to. Instead, you can now open an ABLE account and there's no look back period, which would disqualify them. They're automatically going to be eligible for SSI. Once they take the money out of their bank account and they put it into the ABLE account, they're then eligible again next month for benefits. So that's a great way to not have to spend a lot of money drafting a trust. However, if it is a large amount, bigger than $15,000, you likely would want to open up a first party trust or start thinking about this a little bit earlier and maybe make the contributions to the ABLE account a couple of years leading up to that age 18.
Alex, we have a question. Will you take the question?
Of course.
Where can we find a list of qualified expenses or ABLE? So
the National ABLE Resource Center is a wonderful place. It's a nonprofit organization that provides a ton of information. I will say that they are extremely lenient with qualified disability expenses, because you can say, well, you know, going out for dinner, for example, that really is teaching my child how to have proper etiquette when they go out for dinner. So we really haven't had or heard of many situations where anyone has been disqualified or anything has happened because of that. You know, I would use it probably for larger expenses, especially if maybe they need help with transportation, aren't able to drive. You can use it for a taxi, for an Uber. You can use it, you know, for a variety of things. So usually we say use the SSI money for the day-to-day type of stuff, and then the ABLE account maybe for some of those larger expenses. Another thing that an ABLE account can be used for is housing. So say, for example, your child is receiving SSI, but they're not able to pay what's called their fair share of expenses. So their SSI has been reduced by 1/3. You can fund an ABLE account each year take $1,000 out a month, and maybe that plus their SSI is equal to their fair share. And this again may be a little bit complicated, but this is another way so that instead of receiving only $500 a month from SSI, they can receive $700 a month from SSI because they're not disqualified. They're not because SSI is based on where they live, and if you're taking money to pay for food and shelter from SSI, then that amount is reduced, but you can use the ABLE account again to kind of take a monthly amount out of the ABLE account to help supplement their SSI to pay for their fair share of expenses, which will then increase what they're able to receive from SSI. And I may not have explained that very clearly.
No, you did. I have a question, Alex. Can you use money from the ABLE account for dental?
Yeah.
Because that's such a big expense, and that's one that you worry about sometimes in the future.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
because Medicaid doesn't pay for that.
Right. So that was one that I remember hearing many years ago, and that was like kind of a, a point for me thinking about. I know it's kind of crazy, but dental.
Oh yeah, let me I can't see not.
Okay, that's what I remember hearing that. So just wanted to
That's a good one. Yes. Yep. Yep. Okay, just Googled it, and the ARC has it on there. Yes. Dental expenses.
I think I remember that. That was a good one, right? To when you're thinking about these expenses in the future, what you can use it on. You said kind of larger expenses. That does seem to fit.
Yeah, it's a good one. And then, gainfully employed people, maybe they're just continuously adding additional money. They're able to now save money in their name, like finally. So ABLE account is a great way if people are again working and put money aside for their future goals, staying below the $2,000. So that number is very, very challenging sometimes to stay below, especially these days if they're not going out and able to do anything, transfer the money over to the ABLE account to keep them below that. Distributions for housing related expenses. So technically you cannot make distributions from a trust, a special needs trust, and pay for housing expenses. If they're on a Section 8 voucher, the distribution from the trust will count as income and could disqualify them for Section 8. So a workaround that we do often is we take a distribution from a special needs trust, we fund the ABLE account, housing expenses paid from ABLE. Amazing. That's one of the best things that we found for the ABLE account is to be able to make sure those government benefits are protected. And I remember one of the first presentations I did talking with this really sweet grandmother, and she says, well, I'm able to make 529 plan contributions for my grandchildren, but I know I can't give money to this. I want everything to be fair and equal. And she really wanted to do the 529 to each grandchild. And now she's able to do that. So thinking of gifts from anyone, you can take that money and put it into the ABLE account. You can have folks put that money in there and keep it simple versus having to fund an irrevocable trust. Would it make sense for small amounts to open an irrevocable trust? Instead, it would make sense to open an ABLE account, especially if the amount's less than 15,000. If folks are getting large amounts from maybe parents, grandparents, and gifts, you will want to open a trust and have the money flow into that. That's a very specific, I definitely would want to talk to a planner, financial planner, and a attorney about that, just because there are pros and cons to each situation. So an ABLE account really is designed to use. It's a savings and a wealth accumulation vehicle, whereas a special needs trust is an estate planning tool. So one doesn't replace the other. You need them both. And again, that's why sometimes we don't suggest opening an ABLE account right away, because we like simple. Our lives are not simple, and we like to keep them as simple as possible when you can. So that's pretty much the presentation that I have for today. So a lot of people say, okay, well, what is the next step that you do? Creating a person-centered plan, especially if you're thinking about transition. A letter of intent we didn't talk much about, but I can send off to Pam. I think this is something that is always suggested that people do. It's a brain dump of everything that you know about your child. Just think if you were to leave for a couple hours, what you may write down for someone that never has stepped in your shoes before. Well, this is a 47-page document of all of that. So it is a little daunting, but it is so needed for us siblings, for us anyone. Please, when you can, start working on it. So, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys have, or, reach out to Pam. She knows how to get a hold of me, Allison, or I can send my contact information. I can put that actually in here now if anybody wants, and then. Yeah, so we have a great website too. I'll put on here that has a ton of resources you can download, specialneedsplanning.com. And I hope this was helpful. Thank you, Kathy.
Very, very informative. I'm interested more about, you said you do a training on creating a team to carry on.
Yes.
That sounds very interesting as well.
Yep. So we have a, I'm doing a full presentation on the letter of intent on May 26th for Minuteman ARC. I think it's on their website. And I think that I'll talk a lot about the team too, because when I think of the letter of intent, who really needs it? It is that team. So what's important to be in that document, I'll talk about. And I don't have any plans for a team to carry on at this point, but probably will later this summer. I'm sure we'll have something scheduled.
Yeah, and I think the reason why, one of the things I was going to ask you, this is probably just more of a general question to you, Alex, but COVID has changed so much for us. And I know at the beginning, there was this total panic that I could die, my husband could die. And so we started just, every day I was like, we need to make lists of all of the things that I don't know that I need to know, and vice versa. So I'm curious how that impacted some of the families that you work with and some of the perspectives. Like, has COVID changed anything about planning for when, we're no longer here? I
feel that I agree with you. I remember sitting here the very beginning of COVID and all the questions we're getting from clients. I created the letter of intent presentation because of that, because you're like, oh my gosh, I need to write this down. I need to write this down. And here we are a year and 2 months later. And I think people have thought about that. Their feelings have changed. I think the biggest item the biggest kind of change from a team perspective is that people feel more comfortable naming people that they trust that aren't boots in the ground right next to their child. That they can have family and out of state that can have some type of a role in their child's life as well now more than ever, because we are so comfortable with this type of platform. Maybe they're actually talking more to their child because they're doing FaceTime, because mom and dad are doing FaceTime with their child. So that's something that, we've gotten phone calls from families all over the country. I did a presentation in Alaska a couple months ago. So, I think that is the biggest change, is that we are looking at things a bit differently, that we can have a bigger team that can help people. So
I love that. That's so great. And we have another question. Is there a template available for the letter of intent?
Yes, I am going to pull it up right now. It's on our website. Let me just find it and I'll put the URL. So there you go.
Thank you so much.
Download it there. Well, I had fun with you guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex. Just such a pleasure. And
thank you. We'll have to have you come back and do the team to carry on. It's a very presentation that I saw a few years ago, and I'm sure you have some new things added to it at this point. So that would be wonderful to have that. So thank you so much.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And
Thank
thanks
you.
everybody for coming tonight.
Thanks for coming, everybody.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.